Hi, I'm James Wise, and welcome to What's Next, a series of video interviews with the CEOs and founders of the technology businesses that are tackling some of the biggest challenges we face today. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of talking to Alex Kendall. He's the founder of Wayve, a business building embodied AI and starting with autonomous vehicles. Wayve have just announced one of the largest funding rounds in history for an artificial intelligence company, being led by strategics like Microsoft, Nvidia, and SoftBank. We were fortunate to back the company since Series A, and in the discussion today, we cover Alex's journey from academics through to starting a business, building that first team, getting the right investors around him, and his vision for the next decade of embodied AI. Alex, welcome to What's Next.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, look, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're very busy at the moment. You know, the purpose of this video series is to talk to founders behind the companies tackling some of the biggest challenges in the world today. Right? There are fewer bigger challenges out there right now than wrestling with what the future of artificial intelligence looks like. Right? I think it's really come to the fore over the last year. And Wayve's mission, you know, the business you founded and are CEO of, is to create embodied AI. So I guess the right starting place is to unpack that idea. What is embodied AI?
That's a great question. Maybe you can start by thinking about what is the promise of AI? What do you think AI might be in a couple of decades? And I think the great promise of AI is that it can just transform the things we do and allow us to do so much more with our lives. Now, if you go back to today, I think most people would think about AI as being ChatGPT, a chatbot, or a co-pilot, or something that is at the tip of your fingers through a keyboard. Now, what embodied AI offers is the ability to physically embody AI in the real world, give it a physical interface to interact with us, to assist us, to help us with what we're doing and to achieve more in our lives, more safely, sustainably. And there's no better example than self-driving cars. I think this will be the first chance people get to experience an embodied AI, one that can deliver your goods, move people around, do so in a way that is more safe and sustainable than transportation we have today. I think that's a really clear example, but there's so much more, whether it's manufacturing, domestic robotics, delivery robots, all of these kind of things. Embodied AI, the definition I'd use is it's AI with a physical interface to the world.
And Wayve's starting on that journey in, as you mentioned, self-driving vehicles. Some people would argue that's one of the hardest places to start, right? It's a heavily regulated area. It's one where safety is absolutely paramount. And obviously there's a huge amount of competition as well, the likes of Tesla and others releasing their first attempts at self-driving. So why start there?
That's right. But the opportunity is massive. If you think about how many cars there are in the world, how important transportation is to society, but also the fact that to solve it, you really need a pretty general purpose level of intelligence to be able to drive safely. If you think about the weird and wonderful things you see on the road or the diversity of scenarios and behaviors, it's not something that a rules-based or a simple logic system can solve. So I think it's going to be the first large-scale example of embodied AI. If you take other examples like manufacturing, often you can have very repeatable, mundane tasks that can be solved by more limited forms of AI. Of course, embodied AI presents a bigger opportunity there. But I think the special thing about self-driving is there exists a business case and there exists an access to data to make it possible. And those two things are critical. I think in the future, we're going to get so much value from domestic robots that are in our living rooms helping us with our lives. But there you have a cold start problem. There's no hardware platforms today, and there's no data to be able to train these systems on. Whereas in self-driving, we have tens of millions of vehicles produced a year that collect data and allow us to train systems that can understand the world. And the business case is clear. This is a huge value to society to be able to move people and goods in a more sustainable and effective manner. So I think those things mean that self-driving is, I think, the biggest near-term opportunity to get embodied AI out and let people experience it to the similar level of delight that we've been, inspired by ChatGPT.
Yeah, and so your thesis, and I think it's a very powerful one, is to say, the problem space when dealing with self-driving vehicles is so big. There's so many edge cases, right? I've been in the car, I've been in a Wayve vehicle driving around King's Cross and experienced the little nudging out that you have to do, the little shimmies you have to do around the roads, which were, most of these things not even designed for cars, right? Designed for horse and carriages around this part of London. And yet it's not novel. So it's a huge problem space, which we can learn from all of these edge cases, but it's not so novel, like, for example, domestic robots or care robots, where we don't know at all how to approach it yet. And so I guess in that that regard, self-driving is an amazing place to start on the journey to embodied AI. But if you go back to your initial thesis and your thinking and the reasons you started Wayve all the way back to your academic days, was that the vision from day one? Was this what you were working on as a student, that you knew for the next decade or perhaps multiple decades that you wanted to solve, the challenge you wanted to solve?
It was definitely the vision. Intelligent robots that we can trust is the future that I was excited and passionate about and have been. But the path to get there is, oh my gosh, that's meandered and transformed along the way. I think the thing that is clear to me today is that it's so important when you're introducing these kind of technologies to not have a big bang of a big drop of automation, but actually have a transition and acceleration from assistance to full automation. And I think we're going to see that in chatbots and co-pilots. Right now they're assistance tools, but we're going to see the evolution into agents that can really act on your behalf. But similarly with self-driving, I think getting the system out there as driver assistance systems in the broader sense, giving people exposure to it, giving it the diversity of experience it needs to learn to be safe. And then using that to evolve it to the point where it can take liability for driving and it can drive, without a steering wheel in a true driverless setting. I think that's that kind of pathway, a pathway that allows us to learn the best product experience and people to learn how to interact with these systems and truly let them scale. I think we're learning that is the best path forward.
That iterative approach to developing it's not just the new technologies, right? But it's new interactions with humans that really matters. And I guess we'll all learn as individuals how to use these new technologies, but also regulation has to shift over time as well. And I think we'll definitely come back to that. But going back to sort of your previous experiences before Wayve, you're doing a PhD in deep learning and computer vision. Do you think that's a necessary first step for founders who are taking on the kind of really difficult domains like embodied AI that you are?
I certainly don't think a PhD is necessary. And I think there are many different PhDs. I was fortunate to have one where I had a very creative platform, an amazing supervisor in lab that allowed me the space to innovate, to explore commercial opportunities and things like that throughout the journey. In many ways, it was great training to be a deep tech entrepreneur, but there's many other ways to get those skills. And I think the key thing is that you can learn and evolve those skills, but more importantly, develop the passion for the problem. Because we're 6 years since we founded the company, but many years before that I was thinking about these ideas, and I think to be able to build something of this magnitude, you've got to really have the fundamental passion and drive for the problem space. And there was no better opportunity for me than Cambridge University being able to be surrounded by such an inspiring environment to think deeply about this problem for many years before getting clarity on what we wanted to go and build.
It's really interesting, that theme of being given the latitude and freedom when you're in an academic environment to try new ideas, to test, to fail, and to try again really comes out in all of the interviews we've been doing with deep tech founders. And it's not true of everyone who goes down that further academic route. And I think there's a lot of criticism of certain academic institutions for being too strict in what they allow people to experiment with. So when they get it right, it really works. But I think giving people that latitude sounds like the really important point, whether it's in academics or it's in other areas of experimentation.
Well, another big part is being comfortable and able to develop contrarian ideas. Whether that was me being outside the bubble of Silicon Valley at the time, or just the open-mindedness of thought to be able to develop ideas that at the time were laughed at by the industry. And I think we've developed a lot, but still have some things to prove. But it's been I think it's been important to be able to carry conviction when you're getting 1,000 no's every month from people that your ideas don't align with them, and to be able to actually find a way to get the level of resources and things like that you need to go and prove out the proof points to be able to actually let your results do the talking and sway the market.
Because I think when we first met, I think I discovered what you were working on through your PhD, through published papers that you were putting out there around monocular depth perception, other novel ideas in computer vision. But when we first met, it was literally in your dorm room in Cambridge. I think it was like your desk and your bed was what you were working around at the time. Can you talk to us a little bit about that journey from starting up as an academic at Cambridge and those first steps to going from that to founding a business and those first few hires to help set it all up?
Yeah, absolutely. So my PhD, I was fortunate enough to be part of, discover some of the ideas of enabling a robot to see for itself, to be able to understand what's around it, what's going to happen next, and develop some of the first deep learning algorithms for semantic segmentation, scene understanding, and understanding the motion and geometry around you. This work, was quite exciting. And I actually, as part of it, got the chance to go to Silicon Valley and spend some time with another deep tech startup, Skydio. And that just captured my imagination. I didn't really understand what a venture-backed startup could build. And I left just inspired after that experience. I was exposed to another couple of startups in the UK ecosystem, but at the end of my PhD, or towards the end, I became convinced that this technology would enable intelligent robotics that we could trust. The idea that you don't need to have, for example, a self-driving car that's told how to drive or navigates with a 3D map or a set of rules, but one that can have the onboard intelligence to understand the complex interactions that we have on the roads today, or the diversity of scenarios that you encounter. So I was really convicted of that. I went and pitched it to many of the self-driving car companies at the time, and as I was talking about before, got pretty firm no's, and more than that, this is crazy, it'll never be safe. And so, stubborn me, how do you go build it then? Fortunately, we had some commercial interest at the time, but I really didn't want to compromise on any of that very clear, maybe a little bit academic vision of, look, end-to-end learning is the way to go and do this. And so that led down the path of, we were fortunate to find some early investors. We rented a house, built a prototype in the garage, and started to get this technology off the ground. The first few hires were tough though, because I'm grateful for every single person that's joined our company, because they've devoted their time to this mission, which is a special thing in itself. But the very first few ones came from networking, from relationships we had and things like that. And then it quickly grew from there.
The interesting thing for you is you're not just building, an ambitious embodied AI company, which is incredibly attractive to great talent, but you're doing it in a way which, 5 or 6 years ago was really, it was a completely different approach, right? It was end to end, which at the time, even the likes of, Waymo, which was the market leader and is in some areas still, were doing differently. So were you in a war for talent, not just to get people to join the company, but also against some of the biggest software businesses in the world?
Yes, but fortunately, there were more and more people that agreed with the arguments we were making that end-to-end learning was the way to do this, and if you shared that conviction, then we were the place to go and build that. We're seeing some other efforts in the market, like Elon announced that Tesla is shifting this way last year, and so we're seeing more and more, people considering these approaches. But certainly for the first 4 or 5 years, we were alone in the market. That meant that we could build a real brand, a real vision around this, some thought leadership, and it was amazing. Able to bring people who are global experts in this from around the world, relocate them to London or some of the other offices we now have around the world to go work on this problem.
I mean, I think, reflecting on lots of experiences, both investing in deep tech founders and some of these interviews, finding that early orthogonal approach to a problem, it is different. You do get lots of no's, but it means the people who do join you end up being true believers, right? They're part of a tribe. They're not just there because they're mercenaries on the way to build a big business and hopefully make some money. They have to be visionaries by default as well, which hopefully, and I think from the early days of Wayve certainly has proved true, is the kind of people you end up with, which is great.
Culture's key as well. Like we've had a really high culture of learning, of exploration, of excellence in what we do, and I think the ability for people to come on board and explore, and certainly we've gone through various phases, right? And I think the early stage, it was very much about trying a bunch of ideas, a lot of fundamental research. Then we moved into a stage of scaling out engineering and scale of compute and data we have behind the problem, and now more into a commercialization and productization phase. And through all these stages, they have evolved with different chapters, and our culture has needed new aspects added to it. But I think the core thread through it all has been one of creativity and innovation that I've certainly really enjoyed, and has been a great thing to bring together the team around a hard problem.
Yeah, and you feel it when you go into your offices. It's kind of amazing because it's this weird mix, and we'll show you some video of it. This weird mix of garage, and I grew up. My dad's a car engineer, so I grew up in those kind of garages. Garage, advanced computer lab, but also just a group of people who are incredibly energetic and excited about building stuff. It's a really interesting experience, and you're in the heart of King's Cross as well, which is pretty amazing. That culture, bringing on those first few people, must have been a huge relief. But as you said, the big challenge here is raising funding, right? This is it is not an app you can launch overnight and get some early revenues and proof points around. And so how did you navigate those first funding discussions? What were the kinds of investors you got around the table, and how has that changed over the years?
Yeah, what's been interesting, just like with a team, the other thought I had to mind was how important it was to have a diverse team to tackle this problem. And yes, we started off with a lot of people who had expertise in machine learning science, but bringing on board software engineering, I remember the very first software engineer that came on board, he was transformational for a lot of the infrastructure that we needed to build to actually show our technology in action on the roads. But as we added more skill sets, that was so important to allow us to build out a whole rounded product. And I think similar has been true on the investor side. Some things that have worked for us, and look, I think one of the hardest things with deep tech is getting people that will believe in you and follow a journey that is 10 plus years towards a venture scale return. It's a challenging ask, but I think again finding diversity of investors has been really important. Early on, I think we were fortunate to find some very passionate investors, like one of the leads of our seed round also found our work through just reading about some of the papers that I wrote in my PhD. And that was special because we brought on investors that were aligned with us around the thesis and the problem, and trusted us to go and deliver on that, but then could support us in other areas where we needed to grow. As we've developed, I think finding more domain-specific investors has been important, whether it's some of our recent strategic backers like Microsoft or NVIDIA, or SoftBank, who have such a deep expertise in AI and robotics. And having those passionate domain-specific investors is something that certainly in Embodied AI, we're fortunate that there is a market for. And that alignment just means that we can take the right level of risk to go and achieve the big vision, rather than, I guess, taking an early exit at something more short term.
And we should definitely talk a little bit about your relationship with the strategics, and both the software companies and the car companies, because there's a bit of an interesting dynamic, I'm sure, there for you to navigate. But before we go there, maybe let's talk a little bit about the technology, right? The last year, as you've already mentioned, has been dominated by people's experience of things like ChatGPT, of finally getting to some kind of experience of AI that they feel is really impactful, even if there's been lots of advances in machine learning in the back end of software for a long time. How has the release of LLMs and advances in transformers changed the way or improve the way that Wayve operates? Because, from an external perspective, you're tackling a computer vision problem, and LLMs look like they're tackling, it's in the title, a language problem.
Yeah, well, let's compare and contrast cognitive AI, LLMs, with embodied AI. And I think the first observation I'd make is that the same trends that we see in cognitive AI problems, we're seeing the exact thing play out in embodied AI, whether it's the rise of synthetic data, the importance of scale, or the need for multimodality. These same things have been important to us in self-driving, and I can talk through some examples. But the biggest macro comment I'd make is when I was doing my PhD, if you worked on computer vision, speech, robotics, you're in completely different labs in different spaces. The approach was had some similar ideas, but they were very different architectures. And now we're just seeing end-to-end transformers solve everything, right? It's a question of the data, of how do you align different modalities, but ultimately one fundamental, like one foundation model, one general purpose intelligence is now becoming so good that it can outcompete narrow AIs for a specific task. And that's a really profound step, because it means that moving into new domains, whether they are they might have less data, or new domains that become a lot more accessible because you can bootstrap from that larger foundation model. But the other amazing thing is that when you can connect different modalities, like for us, driving and language, and to build a vision language action model, a model that's capable of seeing the world, driving the car, and interacting through language, presents so many opportunities. You can now create new experiences where you can interact with the embodied AI through language. You can give it feedback. You can build trust. And as well as it actually just driving the car really reliably. We can train our car not just on driving experience, but also give it the PDF document that the government has issued telling you the road rules of the road. So I think these things are just absolutely remarkable. And the progress in large language models has, well, actually one more statement I'd make is it's been interesting how breakthroughs have gone to and fro in AI. Like if we go back to the early 2010s, a lot of the leading breakthroughs, whether it was things like residual neural networks, batch normalization, some of the techniques in deep learning that advanced the field, all came from computer vision. And then we saw the shift to language where transformers, tokenized representations, these kind of things have now pushed state-of-the-art forward. And it's been interesting how things have gone to and fro. I think a lot of this has been driven by the data and the problem providing those next challenging problems to work on. Now, for me, one of the interesting things is where are things going next? And the argument I'd make for why embodied AI, I think, is going to present the most compelling and interesting set of problems to generate the next breakthrough is because it's the next frontier, right? Going beyond language to video requires order of magnitude more data, from kilobytes of text to petabytes of video. The safety critical problem. Yes, trust and safety is a big part of LLMs, but you don't need to have, like 99.99 can be enough. You don't need to have literally 100.0 around some problems. And so I think trust, safety, provability, transparency, these problems are at the forefront of embodied AI. And then you have efficiency and to be able to run on real-time hardware in a vehicle, dealing with all of the complexities of the open real world. These kind of problems, I think, are going to challenge the field and produce some of the next big advances in AI. So I'm really excited to see those, and hopefully we can contribute to some.
And have you been surprised by the speed of progress? Because I think, and we'll show a video of Lingo and the abilities now to have that natural language discussion with what a self-driving vehicle is seeing. And the first time I saw that, I was really shocked that the vision capabilities, the sort of video to text capabilities of your model was so accurate so quickly. But obviously I'm coming at this from a different perspective and spent a lot of time looking at LLMs rather than the vision models. So have you been shocked by the speed of progress? Were there capabilities that have come almost out the box or with relatively little extra data and fine tuning that have shocked you? Or was this all part of the plan?
I think when you see things that you're surprised by, it's one of the most exciting experiences. And actually, I remember the very first time, some of my colleagues, some members of my team came up with things that I didn't anticipate. And I think we were about 10 people at the time. I got to the size where we were working on so many things that not everyone could know everything. And that it's such a special moment. And certainly across the AI field, the same is true. I think in general, we were seeing a lot of language capabilities come out before, say, GPT-3, where things became accessible to the public. And so we saw it coming somewhat, but I think the scale of public interest and accessibility is something that surprised me. And it's just been such a big tailwind for the industry. I'm delighted about it. But the trend was certainly there. I think the interesting thing for me is that we were seeing a lot of algorithmic breakthroughs that I saw coming, but the scale of the thing I call out is the scale of just brute force engineering, scale of the massive RLHF feedback and things like that made ChatGPT possible, and what OpenAI did to push the boundaries there. That was truly eye-opening. But speed is just going to continue. And I think on the language example you were talking about, I think the cool thing is when you have these kind of ideas that we talk about a couple of different objectives at Wayve. Like the first type is sort of setting an objective that is a clearly scoped piece of work that you need to go and deliver. And these things you can predict. There's schedules behind them. Like delivering a new vehicle program or building out a data source might be an example of that. There's other areas where we strategically want to invest in them, but we don't really know the result, or we can't, infuriates our board and our investors because we can't always quantify the outcome we expect, but we know it's the right thing to invest in. And we started investing in language for robotics maybe 2.5 years ago. I remember a couple of our leaders came to me, BJ and Jamie said, look, we want to start building out language capabilities. And I said, well, this is bizarre. Like, come on, guys, we need to keep focused on autonomous driving and embodied AI. And talk through how it would be so important for trust and interaction. And so, okay, we started working on it. And just, organically, and I think part of this is because of the culture we've been able to build of openness to failure, to try new things, to learn and innovate. These ideas came out that now have morphed into this whole product vision that driving in an autonomous vehicle shouldn't be an experience where you're just strapped in and along for the ride, but one that you can interact with, build trust with the embodied AI, delegate tasks to it, tell it how you want to drive and customize it to your belief. And these kind of journeys are just magic.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting thought process to go through is how do we interact with these new tools going forward? Because we're so used to most interactions with software being keyboard and mouse, right? But that's really forcing us into a state of interaction for the computer's sake, because it likes binary, it likes keystrokes. And as we move into a world where natural language is a natural interface, and as you may have experienced with these headsets, even just visual gestures change, right? People's sentiment or the way you use your fingers can suddenly change the way you interact with a computer. It not just makes it easier for a lot of people, I think, to access these kind of tools, but it also just massively opens up the world to different types of capabilities of software, right? And as you say, embodied AI really captures all of that, this new way of thinking about interfacing with software. Before we go too deep into sort of the future, maybe in the shorter term, when we focus on self-driving cars, right? So we've been talking about self-driving cars for a long time. I think, I think we're approaching almost a decade since Tesla first said that they were going to have a full self-driving vehicle out there relatively soon. I think Google have mentioned this a number of times historically around Waymo. So it's been a field where there's been huge advances in the background, but perhaps not at the speed that some people had predicted. So the obvious question is, when are my groceries going to be delivered by a driver who's assisted by a self-driving vehicle?
This is, of course, a very frequent question I get. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we don't set the wrong expectations and overhype things to say, oh, look, it's going to be here next year and use that to win some short-term favor or funding or something like this, and be very clear with where we're at. So I can talk about the sequencing of how things expect to happen. We certainly have clarity on near term, but longer term, we have expectations internally, but I want to be careful about not oversharing them at this stage. The sequencing of how this is going to happen. Look, I think there's one strategy in autonomous driving, which is that you build a constrained system to run in a very small area, like what we're seeing in San Francisco, and go and prove that it works there, and then try to scale it. And I think the challenges we're seeing with that is that, yes, it can get to work, and it's a magical outcome to be able to ride in one of those cars with no safety driver as a driverless experience. But to cost it down, to figure out how to manufacture it at scale, and through all of that, you're running less than 1,000 vehicles in one city with very limited revenue and lack of diversity of data. That's a challenging path to scale. And I was describing before, I think there is merit to seeing these systems deployed as driver assistance systems to be able to expose the world to them, but more importantly, to build a sustainable business, to get the data you need to be able to train, improve the level of safety for mass deployment. So I think that's the sequence we're going to see. And the exciting thing for us is that we are seeing cars being produced today in production settings that have the compute and the sensors on board that are needed to run an AV 2.0, a next generation system like ours. So what this means is that there's an opportunity to deploy our software on these vehicles. I want to see our software deployed in millions of vehicles in the next 5 years, and to use that data and experience to grow our capabilities and ultimately, over there, update them into along the path to L4 at scale. So I think that's what we're going to see. I think we can get there, relatively quickly, and the expansion from there to things like grocery services, like you described, should come quickly after. But that's the sequence that I think we're going to see, going from where we are today to a world where we have autonomy available throughout the world, not just in affluent areas like Silicon Valley.
And one of the most amazing things about Wayve software, and I've seen both the demo and seen it live, is how quickly you can adapt to new environments. Right, it's absolutely amazing that you can be live in London and within a few days also live in Manchester, which is equally difficult, if not more difficult, drivers. Growing up there, I can tell you.
We went around one of the football stadiums in Manchester after a game, and tell you what,
I hope it was the right football stadium. I hope it was Old Trafford. And so I get the sequencing, and I think it's a really refreshing approach to saying, look, this isn't all in your control, right? There's obviously many macro factors, whether that's regulatory or other players that will enable the rollout of Wayve over time. When you think about your relationship, and this is a common theme for many deep tech founders, when you think about your relationship with some of the big industry players, right, the car companies in particular, how have you navigated that today, and how do you think about them as potential partners, potential rivals, potential investors, and potential acquirers?
There's a couple of things that I've held quite firmly throughout Wayve that have, I think, provided great progress for us. The first belief is that we want to have a partner-first approach because this is such a big problem and it allows us to focus on our expertise. So not looking to build out the whole value chain ourselves, but to partner with the leading businesses in other areas so that we can move fast together. That's the first one. The second one is finding a number of, I feel very fortunate for the strategic partners that we've had along the way that have both invested in our company and provided the capital to grow, but also the problem setting, the feedback, and the support that we've needed to make this a reality. And a good example of that is Ocado. I'm really grateful to Ocado for some early partnership that exposed us to the data, the learning that we needed to advance our product at the time, and certainly the capital between our Series A and B phase that allowed us to grow. And I think whether it's Ocado or other more recent strategic investors like Microsoft and Nvidia, I think the recipe for us that's worked really well is finding partners that are aligned in creating the end market, whether it's self-driving at scale, I think will be transformative to Microsoft Azure, or to the ability for Nvidia to capture the automotive market with their embedded compute systems, and then to be able to be a neutral party towards the customer base that we're looking to work with, and so I think the support that we have from strategic partners that can allow us to more effectively deliver value to the automotive industry has been important, but not taking investment from our customers or the market that we're addressing yet, because that allows us to go to that market in a neutral way and really work with the best partner that's going to best support Wayve. So that's been the recipe that's worked really well so far. And then when it comes to the partnership ecosystem, finding some of the best businesses, and fundraising is not just about pitching investors, but also pitching leaders from those companies, whether it's our insurance partners, our data partners, compute partners, and ultimately getting them excited and aligned with our vision is something that we try to be really thoughtful about.
I mean, it's the right approach in my view, and it's an approach which is really hard to navigate because certainly as an investor, when we look at early stage deep tech businesses, you need validation from the market, and often that market is, if you're in biology, it's big pharma companies. If you're in automotive, it's obviously the big car companies. But you don't want them steering your strategy, right? And in many ways, the reason why Wayve's successful and many deep tech founders will be successful is because they're taking an orthogonal approach to what the market and the incumbents assume is the right way anyway. So they kind of dismiss it early on.
One thing you've got to be careful about, though, is that if you're taking an orthogonal approach, one that, if it works, can just disrupt the entire market, you can often be put in the category of a hedge. Like a big strategic might say, okay, if there's a 1% chance of this happening, but if it does, it'll kill my business. So I'm going to, look at it, think about it as a hedge in case it's a reality. And I think figuring out where an opportunity is a hedge versus where there is deep belief and conviction is something that is really important to separate.
Yeah, it's very hard to do expert interviews in this space, in particular when you're doing deep tech stuff, for exactly this reason, because I think some of the leaders in the space, they want to hedge their bets a little bit. They don't want to be caught on camera saying this will never work. So yeah, look, kind of, it's interesting. It's not perhaps the way we're going at the moment, which isn't particularly useful when you're doing reference calls on industries. So look, I think you're on an incredible journey. You've built this business, you've hired this team, you've raised significant sums of capital now, and you'll be shipping products, not just in the self-driving space, but more broadly in embodied AI. How have you found this journey personally, right? You're sort of 6 years into it. It's a significant amount of time, may feel longer than that. How have you found it personally, and how do you navigate those physical, mental challenges that founders go through?
Oh, I love it, James. I feel like it's just an absolute privilege to have this journey. If I think about where it's gone and where it's going to go forward, it's magical. I also think that what I've really enjoyed is the challenges have just changed year on year, from writing the first code to building a team, finding a commercial strategy, or leading an executive team now. They're totally different skill sets. I feel fortunate to have had the opportunity to grow into each of those and learn some things along the way, some things the hard way, but also I have the support of the team around me for that. It's been awesome. It's certainly been highs and lows along the way, but I think my approach to some of when challenging times come up is if I'm candid, I really enjoy them because they're interesting problems, and when a problem comes up, it's like, okay, next problem to solve. And I don't really take the step back and get upset about things. It's more, okay, this is what's the next thing? What's the next step to solve this? How do I unblock this? Whether it's like a no from an opportunity or a candidate or an investor, like, okay, where to next? And I've never really had a plan B. It's not like, I put in place, multiple strategies like that. It's always been, okay, this is what I've got conviction around. Let me just go run down the steps, the iteration to go make it work. Look, the pressure is a privilege. I really love it.
Do you think it's a necessity not to have a plan B? Do you think people who go into starting these incredibly ambitious projects can't do it with and if this doesn't work, I'll just go and work at Google mentality?
Anyone who's been around a startup knows how stretched resources are. And I just imagine if we had started and tried to build the AV 2.0 system that we believe, as well as an AV 1.0 system as a hedge, I don't know, we would have done both terribly. So I think by necessity, you can't afford to have a plan B. And when you're doing something so disruptive, I think you've got to be all in. Now, that changes as you grow, I guess, as you get to being a huge public company. You've got the resources to be able to afford to hedge, to have a corporate strategy around these kind of things. And, maybe that'll be a dynamic that we get to learn as we continue to grow. But certainly right now, we are all in on making this plan A work.
Yeah, and look, it's amazing looking back, because I think when sort of I first started speaking to you, when Balderton started first speaking to you, we obviously spoke to other people who were working in similar areas in terms of their thinking of how the software challenge here may develop. And some of those founders did choose the AV 1.0 because that's where the money was. They chose those early partnerships. You get pulled in a certain direction. You set up a team just for that, but that becomes the core of the team because that's where the money is. And over time, you lose that mission.
Oh, yeah. I mean, two things to add is one, I think you've got to be mission first and not compromise things for money or things like that. That's a very slippery slope to losing clarity on that. And the second thing is, yes, it's important to be all in on plan A, but equally important to forego all sunk costs when you see things have evolved. And I can talk about so many examples where we have, put millions of dollars into for example, into a vehicle platform or a simulation approach as two interesting examples in our history, and learned that there's just a better way of doing things. And it's tough at the time to make a decision like that, but multiple times we have foregone a ton of sunk costs to take a new path because it's just simply better. And I think there's no problem with that. Having a team that is a culture that is open to that and always thinks about what is the best decision on a go-forward basis. I think that's key, and I'd differentiate. I'd add that to all in on plan A, but all in on a plan A in a way that can just chase that end vision and not be biased by existing investments or sunk cost.
And so you spoke a little bit about personally, like, pressure is a privilege and that you thrive in these environments, which I think is, a phenomenal mindset to have. And I think probably a needed mindset to take on a challenge of this scale. How do you feel about the community of deep tech founders? Obviously we're here in London. You had the opportunity, I'm sure, many times to move out to the Valley. And obviously you moved to London from New Zealand. So you have a sort of global perspective on some of these communities. What's that like? And what more can we do if you think we need to embolden people to take on these challenges?
I'm so passionate about deep tech as a category, and I don't know, it frustrates me a bit when I see these headlines of all this capital going into the next, do I want to call out an area, like the next banking app or the next, Instagram for cats or something like this. I think that when you sit there, call it in 50 years' time and think what really mattered, if you think about what mattered in the 20th century or something like that, people will call out everything from aerospace industry or the space race or computing or things like this. And I think those big breakthroughs, whether it's personal computers, smartphones, soon embodied AI, I think these are the things that really move forward in the world. Now, I feel it's awesome that capitalism and the financial markets has found a way that those things are financeable, and I think that's really healthy. But I think there's a lot more that we could do. There's a lot more, and particularly in this environment right now, where with high interest rates and low deployment of capital, naturally it's more gravitating to some of the short-term bets. And again, that's where I was talking about diversity of investors, people that are passionate and aligned and strategically aligned with what you're building becomes more important. And that shrinks the pool of capital available. But ultimately, the more investment we can see in this area, the more passion, I think would just be a better thing for the world. One thing that I think we could see more of is a deeper connection between the investor community and deep tech problems. Like often I've found investors, take a look at our business and say, oh, wow, this is very complex to understand. How am I going to diligence this? And on a surface level, it can be, there's 100 reasons why you can just pass. And it takes a level of curiosity and passion to actually spend the time, understand it, and get comfortable to invest in it. And so I think, encouraging that kind of mindset and finding more appetite to do that would be a real good thing. I guess going back to a question about deep tech founders, I guess the other comment I'd make is that there is such a diversity in deep tech, right? If you're B2B SaaS, all of those areas are a little bit more relatable in the problems that you face. I found, ways to connect, but I think that's certainly something that we could do more of.
I think it's an incredibly broad range of problems facing deep tech founders. Here at Balderton, we have, CEO communities to try and bring people together. We have the founder wellbeing program as well, which I know you're on, to try and help them individually. But ultimately, even as a fund with, venture capital style timelines, 10 years, we think of ourselves as pretty patient. There are many big problems that are going to require deeper pockets of capital and longer timelines to solve. How has working with a generalist software investor like Balderton been different to some of the more strategic investors you've had in other areas?
I mentioned how important diversity is in an experience, whether it's our team that we're building or even our cap table, our investors. And yes, we have passionate, deep tech specialist investors in our space, whether it's Compound or Eclipse Ventures or SoftBank, NVIDIA, and Microsoft. These are strategics and investors that are super passionate about the specific area that we're building out in AI and robotics. But I think with diversity, it's also important to have other areas. And I think the role that Balderton's played for us so far has been, there's been so many times where I've called up for support where the expertise has just been such a game changer for us, whether it's in areas of, the fact that the strength that you bring here in the UK, whether it's areas of regulation here or UK specific challenges around compliance or legal. This has been a huge area of support, or the generalist exposure that we get and that need to grow as a startup. I think these things have complemented the specific expertise that we have, and so But even there, like yourselves and Saranga and others have the level of curiosity to dive deep into the technology, and I've seen the level of the level of interest that's certainly really exciting. So I think it's been it's been really important, and we have been able to build that complementary set of investors, and Balderton has been such a key part of that.
I really appreciate that. And I do think, while this video series is really around deep tech founders and people building these businesses which will, like you say, leave an impact for the next century, there are so many learnings across being an entrepreneur in almost any domain that you're building in, that I guess our job as VCs is to try and help aggregate those learnings and share them back to the entrepreneurs and help them on their journey. So hopefully we've been able to do that across lots of domains.
One of the coolest things has been the CEO forums that you brought together to be able to meet some other amazing CEOs in your portfolio and spend time to learn. And I mean, there are so many shared problems that we go through. That's been a real special thing for me. And then the Well-Founded program to support our well-being, that's been a fun one to learn more about how to optimize the work I do to sustain a level of high performance. These kind of things have been real milestones in my journey.
We feel very fortunate that we eventually did that work and we got there and managed to support Wayve, and I'd love us to invest in more. And I think part of the reason why we're doing the What Next series and part of the reason why we're so glad to have had you on today is so that more people who are listening to this do consider jumping in, whether joining a company or starting one, to take on some of the biggest challenges in the world today. And I have no doubt that in the decade to come, embodied AI won't just mean that Wayve is a very successful company, but will also enable many more people to embrace this technology and build things themselves on top of it. So look, thank you so much for what you're building, and thank you very much for taking time to speak to us today.
Awesome, it's a pleasure, James. Cheers.